Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will appear here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And yesterday was Earth Day, and I talked a bit about Earth Day. But due to some sort of technical issue, we did not go out to all the channels that we would normally go out to. I'm checking now to make sure we're doing that today. And yes, it does appear that we're going out everywhere we should be going. Um, so I hope you're having a lovely day. Today I was going to talk a little bit more about the art of ritual. And speaking of ritual, yesterday after the midday program, I rebroadcast our Earth Day ritual that I had done at Earth Spirit Emporium. I hope that perhaps you watched and enjoyed that. And it's an example of basically a solitary ritual done in a public manner. Um, and hello to Janet in the chat room. And what do I mean by that? I mean that I was basically the primary active participant because of the circumstances and the way that it was set up, and did the parts myself. And if you watch it, you'll see what I mean. And this is not the way that I would normally prefer to do public ritual. It's much more what I might do for a broadcast ritual, which of course this was. It was a broadcast ritual. I wasn't really expecting uh, anyone to be taking part in it live. Now, we did have Susan Dancing Star come to take part live at the last moment. We also had Jazrick with me in front of the camera, whereas I had thought he would be behind the camera, so I might have arranged it differently if I had known that. But as it was, I had expected to be pretty much the sole participant, and that's how I did it. And sometimes you're going to be in that position if you're doing live broadcast ritual or public ritual, where you may be the only person who um, is in a position to be doing the ritual. And how do you do it? Well, you do it like I do it there. You do all of the parts and you keep good track of the energy. Hello to Zane in the chat room. It's good to see you, Zane. Now, last week when we were talking about public ritual, I made a big deal out of the fact that you must keep track of the energy. And when you're doing really any ritual, but especially a public ritual, it's very important that you keep everyone's attention, you keep the energy focused, and you keep it moving. This is important for everybody's experience of the ritual and also for any effectiveness you're hoping for from the ritual. It's very easy to let it get distracted in various ways. Particularly if it's the kind of public ritual where there may be people that you've never met before, people who don't understand anything about ritual. You have to bear in mind that such people may be present and still keep everything focused. And this is part of why doing public ritual is a special set of skills. And you also have to be tolerant of the fact that when you're doing, for example, a public ritual, in a place such as a metaphysical bookstore, people who are present may not know the things that you would expect inside a temple or a coven. And if they happen to do something that would not normally be considered proper, such as just wandering out of the circle, you have to remember they don't necessarily know any better unless you have taken the time to tell them. Now, in this ritual, because um, the live participants were all right there together, I didn't necessarily explain anything like that. But I probably would if it were a larger public ritual. And as I was saying last week, explaining the parts of the ritual that you're doing can be very important. And all kinds of different things come to bear in this, including um, what all is happening around you. And, I can talk at great length about what's good for public ritual. But that doesn't necessarily mean that in that moment, you or I will remember all of those things. and you do the best you can. Um, More important than everything else is providing a good experience, as well as an effective ritual for everyone. And if you forget this element or that element, it's much less important than those features. Because what people are going to remember are two main things. One is the effectiveness of the ritual, and the other is how it made them feel. And you always want it to make them feel good about having come. And, I was telling the story in a previous broadcast about a friend who had gone to her first ritual as a Samhain ritual at a very famous temple. But they explained nothing about what they were doing, and it totally freaked her out. She did not have a good experience and would have left paganism in general if it had been left laying that way. Um, you have to bear in mind that the ritual is not for you as the facilitator when you're doing a public ritual. Now, when we're talking about a temple or a private group ritual, many of these things still obtain, but it is a different discipline. For one thing, in a private group ritual, and hello to Christine in the chat room. It's good to see you, Christine. Um, but in a private group ritual, chances are everyone already knows circle etiquette and everything else you want them to know. Chances are they've been working together for a while. Um, Maybe one or two people might be new. There's plenty of time to explain to them everything that you would want them to know. So if they prove not to pay attention to this, um, then it's appropriate to be perhaps a little more displeased with them because they will have known. You will have told them, they will have had practice. But in a public ritual, you can't assume that of people. And bizarre things can happen, and you can't really blame people who don't know. I remember one ritual at Foster Avenue Beach in Chicago where someone wandered away from the circle and went to pee on a tree in full vision of everybody else there, and many people were quite upset. Um, More that they had left the circle, but who knows who you're going to get at a public ritual? Maybe being upset about their peeing on the tree, but that they did not know not to leave the ritual partly depends on whether you told them or not. I remember being at one of the the new witches' ball rituals back in the 90s. And as the circle was cast, one young lady who had been heavily drinking before we got to the circle proceeded to vomit in place in the circle. Um, no one's fault but ours because we had allowed drinking before the ritual. Um, the simple truth is the energy hit her and she was not ready for it. Um, so while there were some people who were upset that she had done this, she really didn't know what to expect. She wasn't prepared for it. And we were very careful never to allow the drinking to begin before the ritual at a new witch's ball thereafter. So after that, what we did at the witches' balls is that the first hour or 2 hours was more family friendly. There were events for children. There was the ritual. There might be a couple of contests. And then after that, generally speaking, it ceased to be a family event. People could drink if they wanted to. Um, and there was no problem with this because all of these things had already had their place. So it's possible to accommodate many different things in one event. Generally speaking, I am of the point of view that it's better not to be drinking and so forth before a ritual. And this is one of the reasons. Particularly people without a lot of experience with energy, can have a variety of mishaps under those circumstances. I certainly have met people who do, but it's not what I encourage. And it's not that I have an issue with people who enjoy drinking, but you do it after you do your magical work. Now, having said that, for some people, it can help to lower their inhibitions and perhaps assist them in that way. But that it's not the same thing as being drunk. And drunken ritual is never a good idea. And Christine says, definitely live and learn. Yes, you live and learn. Um, Sometimes you learn painfully. I was telling the story about the woman who did the very, very long act of power where they're passing several individual things around the circle that took so long that other high priestesses had to step in and intervene. Hopefully, that priestess learned not to do that again. Um, but the galling thing was that she had been warned not to do it by people who already knew and did it anyway. Hopefully, she saw why it was a problem. Uh, and Saran in the chat room says, you can set yourself on fire. Yes, you can. You can do that, particularly if you've been drinking. You can do it if you haven't. And that, is something to be mindful of in traditional rituals where there are lots of candles. You can set yourself on fire. We have a friend once who, simply by leaning over the altar, set his hair on fire. And was quite shocked that this had happened. I myself, just a few weeks ago, the reading room at our Spirit Emporium is not very large, and I had leaned forward um, for some reason or another and caught my hair on the flame of the candle. And it's very easy to do. So you need to be mindful of that. Now, the plus side is that if that setting your hair on fire is probably not going to last more than a couple of seconds because it's not really inclined to burn. But you still need to be very careful with it, and there can be exceptions. Setting your robe on fire, setting your clothing on fire. I remember seeing a high priest set his sweater on fire from a candle once. People, particularly people who have robes with very long dramatic sleeves, have to be very careful of candles and the like. But not even those things are the full range of what you have to consider, because one of the most remarkable memories I have was at a very formal ritual that involved a thurible, which is a charcoal censer, and it was being swung by chains with the lit charcoal in it and the powdered incense on top. And the person doing the censing was so enthusiastic that they swung the thurible so hard that the charcoal brick came out of the thurible, flew several feet across the room, and landed on the carpet, which then caught fire. Um, Now, it was only a little black singe, and it was dealt with immediately, but these things happen, and you must be mindful of them. And hello to Melanie in the chat room. It's good to see you, Melanie. So if you're going to be doing ritual, public or private, that's going to involve candles and lit incense, it's usually a good idea to have one of those little fire extinguishers right under the altar where you can get it easily. And Melanie says, we had an exploding punch bowl with candles at a ritual once. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes things you don't expect will happen. Um, I used to do a very theatrical movement where you took um, alcohol and Epsom salts and set them on fire, and you got this beautiful flame. But once, when someone else was using this same technique, they put so much into the vessel that when they lit it, the flame went all the way to the ceiling, scorched the ceiling, and filled the room with a great deal of atmosphere, so much that it had to be taken outside. Um, so it's a good idea, if you're going to be working with these things, that you practice with them, that you have a clue of what to expect from them. And if you're thinking this is the time to be extremely dramatic, practice your drama first, because sometimes too much drama is too much drama. Another one I remember is one of the early New Witches' balls. Um, there was a ritual that involved a jack-o'-lantern filled with a sack of wine. And at the strategic point one of the officiants was to stab the jack-o'-lantern with a ritual blade and release the wine into a vessel to then be used for the toast. Um, and as it turns out, the person asked to do that was my then, I believe, 7-year-old niece. This did not go as planned. Not only was she not able to effectively stab the jack-o'-lantern, but then several of the adult priestesses each took a try, and they all failed because no one had bothered to try this before bringing it out. What they had done is they had not filled their sack of wine um, sufficiently to be punctured by the knife. Instead, it simply collapsed on itself. So there are a lot of very dramatic things you can do in a ritual, but don't make your first try the actual live ritual. Um, you may find yourself with things not going as you expected. Um, some other interesting things. I always enjoyed any sort of burning, but today we have a lot more fire alarms to worry about than we used to, unless we're out actually outside. So burnings are perhaps not as useful in indoor ritual as they once were, but still certainly outdoor. They're always very there's always a certain emotional impact to seeing um, your petition or your releasing actually catch fire and physically go away. But another thing that you can do, and you can also, as well as regular paper, you can use flash paper for that, which makes it into a much more indoor friendly experience. But you can also, instead of burning things that you want to manifest or send away, you can write them on rice paper or tissue paper to be dissolved in water, which is also very dramatic because you can see them literally dissolving into the elements. There are all kinds of things to do. Um, one of the things that can be very effective in public ritual is chanting. And it doesn't have to be good. It just has to make people feel good. And dancing can be useful depending on the motor limitations of the people involved. And in my experience, pagan ritual dancing is usually pretty tame, um, but it can do a lot to raise energy. And these are some of the things that you can do. Um, these and many other things are very helpful to raising energy and also to giving people an experience. Um, and when we talk about private ritual, you don't have to do anything like that. The some of the best private rituals I've ever done were entirely internal, and if someone had walked in on me, they'd have probably thought I was having a nap, or if they knew me, that I was meditating, because everything was being done within. But that doesn't really work so well when you're dealing with a group of people, and especially at a public ritual where the experience is part of why people come. Why do people come to public rituals? They come for community, they come for mutual ceremony, they come for the experience, and they come to socialize. And for a lot of people, they come for their first experience. And these are all things you have to bear in mind when you're putting together a public ritual. That the people you're dealing with may not have had any experience with live pagans previously. And therefore, you want to make sure that you're not giving them a negative experience for their first experience. And, I've seen a lot of people in our community do exactly that. Either at rituals or other places, be very disdainful of people who are new to the community or who don't have the experiences they've had. And this is a terribly destructive thing. And something one should always avoid. When a person is brand new into the community, you want to be welcoming. And if they don't know something, we'll help them learn it. And also bear in mind there may be more than one take on whatever it is. If someone comes to you, for example, with the idea that something is done in a certain way, but it's not the way that you do it, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. It means they're coming from a different background. And it might be entirely appropriate to say, oh, yes, some people do it that way, but here we do it this way. Um, and an example of that, I mentioned earlier the very long ritual at the one New Witch's Ball. Another thing that that priestess did was cast a counterclockwise circle. Now, in certain traditions, that's something that is done for certain occasions, including rituals of the dead. In other traditions, you would never do that. And we had warned her this would be a bad idea, at least unless she thoroughly explained it, because the vast majority of people at that ritual did not know that background. But what I would not say is that she was wrong. She came from a different background. They had a different way of doing things. But she should have explained it to people who did not understand it because it became a big issue for a lot of people who were there. Um, Now, Christine says, I like the way the rituals at the St. Louis Pagan Picnic keep it simple enough for all to take part. And yes, absolutely. That is, I think, on most occasions, the best advice for a public ritual to keep it simple enough so that everyone can easily take part. Um, but it depends. There are going to be other times where it's going to be more of a performance ritual. Um, I'm reminded of the Ride the Dragon ritual from many years ago. That was very much a performance ritual. It was in effect a mystery play, and mystery plays are generally meant to be watched more than taken part in. And they can be public rituals too, but people have to know what to expect from them. But generally speaking, keeping everything simple for people is the best way, particularly at public events. The St. Louis Pagan Picnic is one of the best events, um, in my opinion, that you might go to, especially as a first-time pagan. And I've enjoyed going to it for many, many years, and I highly recommend it. And I was talking last week about why it's so important to have this kind of thing. And one of the things I most disagree with that I see all the time is someone says, "I'm brand new to paganism. What should I do?" And people say, "Well, read everything you can." And that is not the advice I give people. My advice is to go out, meet people in the community, and see what's actually going on, then read. Because the truth is, a lot of the books are not really a good introduction to the actual community. Um, Too many authors write as if their way was the only way, and you'll read their book and go out and think everyone else is doing it wrong, and they're not. And they're also not going to take kindly to the idea that they're doing it wrong. It's much better to actually meet people, in my opinion. And I'm a great believer in learning things through experience. And then also, reading is wonderful, but it's not going to be a credible substitute for actually meeting the people. Because you can read 1,000 books, then go meet the people and find out you don't like them. Um, it is you can read 1,000 books and find that in real life the things they recommend may not be for you. Whereas if you actually go and experience them first, if you're in a position to do so, you start with greater knowledge. And then you can read all that you want and have a good basis in what's really there to judge your reading from. And of course, today, a lot of that is going to be online. And years ago, that advice would not have been very helpful to people unless they were in a major metropolitan area, because there wouldn't have been much of a community for them to meet, let alone a public community for them to meet. But today, you can find all kinds of groups doing public things online and really learn about what it is that people are doing and who they are. And I think that's a very good way to introduce yourself to the community. And then read everything you want to read, or do them simultaneously. But always remember with anything that you're reading, including things that I've written, that the person is speaking from their own background. and it's not everyone's background. And I always try to make that clear in things I write and talk about. But a lot of people who've written books either were not concerned with making that clear or were not aware of it. And particularly older works often have that issue. Um, so anytime you read anything that says everybody does this, understand that they don't. There's very little that you can say everyone does. Um, and this is something that if you're doing public ritual, it can be helpful to say, this is how we do it. But, if you go to those people over there, they may do it differently, and that's perfectly fine. That's their way. And if you go to half a dozen different temples doing half a dozen different public events, chances are good that there'll be certain things that they all do, as well as a lot of things that they do not have in common. Ideally, they should each have their own way of addressing it. I can remember public rituals I've gone to that made um, a lot of emphasis on song and music and dance and movement, and others that did not at all. And both of these are perfectly fine. I've been to rituals that put a lot of emphasis on meditation and internal workings, and others that put no emphasis there at all. And these are both perfectly fine ways of going about it. I have been to rituals where if it's your very first time, they'll give you a part, and if you mess it up, they'll be fine because they know it's your first time. And I've been to others where no one is going to take part who hasn't been there for a long time. And these two are both perfectly fine ways to do it, but they're different. And I think that the differences between us are part of our strength. And I think getting upset over the differences is a huge weakness that only serves to tear us apart. And that includes the differences in our histories, because we do not all come from one place of origin. Um, and the more that we can tolerate each other's differences, the more that we can even celebrate each other's differences, the better off we're going to be. And so I always strongly emphasize that. Now, we're coming close to the end of our half hour. Tomorrow, I'll have Chris Copeland. We'll be talking about the latest things from Corellian Publishing. I suspect we may be talking about the great women of antiquity, but we'll see if we actually are talking about that tomorrow. On Thursday, Jason Heikerel will be my guest. We'll be talking about the upcoming illustration of the ancestors, and Friday will be our weekly roundup. And I hope you'll join me for those programs. And also, I have announced my upcoming next Reverend Don's Patreon seminar. And if you're not familiar with my Patreon seminars, this is part of what I do for Patreon. And the Patreon seminars are free to everyone who's a member of my Patreon at the seminar level or above, or they're available for by ticket for $25 per ticket. The next one is on the shadow and shadow work, probably the thing I'm most commonly asked about. And it will be Sunday, May 26th at 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you're interested in that, you can find it at corellianpublishing.com and obtain a ticket for it. Or if you're a member of the seminar Patreon, simply come. With that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. And I want to thank you for joining me. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be mindful of our message in the world, to help us to express ourselves clearly and in ways that people can understand. Help us to find people where we meet them and to speak the language that they can hear. Help us to be able to effectively make our points, whether through ritual or otherwise, as we go through life. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for this and for everything that you do in our lives. And knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always, and